Are these angry British people just pawns in a larger game? Is the party that most of them support an instrument of other people's will? What's really going on in the UK?
Good evening. The events at the Bell Hotel in Epping over the weekend became a very major national news story. And it's the usual stuff, of course. It's those vile, awful, horrid, far-right protesters. How dare they be upset that a 14-year-old girl was allegedly sexually assaulted by somebody who'd crossed the English Channel by boat and was staying in that hotel. And it led to local groups, predominantly females, predominantly mums, worried about kids protesting.
This is Adam Brooks, and astonishing scenes now from Epping. The women are refusing to stand behind the metal barriers. Everyone was penned in opposite the hotel and have decided to march up and show their displeasure to the local council. We have got suffragette flags being waved, women singing. This is astonishing. I'm not sure if the police...
If you travel around central London, everything looks normal. Doesn't even look as if that many migrants, despite the millions that have arrived in the last few years in what was already one of Europe's most populated and densely inhabited countries. But the polls tell their story, and there's a significant concern about immigration, and there are many spots around Britain which are hotspots, migrant hotels where people have gathered and demonstrated and shouted and made a lot of noise, and it's been well reported in the media. There's a lot of anger in Britain at the moment. There's too much immigration. It's not profitable. Most of that immigration is family reunions, a lot of old people. Most of the migration numerically is legal migration. People apply for visas in India or Bangladesh or Pakistan and come across on planes. That includes the unproductive migrants, the old and infirm. But the public attention has been focused on the young men, and so nearly always young men, coming across on dinghies, easily evading Coast Guard. They get put up in migrant hostels or hotels. Sometimes these hotels are of high standard.
What's on the menu? Hash browns, beans, hash browns, salad, eggs. If you fancy having 10 eggs for your breakfast, take 10 eggs.
Some of these hotels are Marriott hotels, 4-star hotels. If this wasn't bad enough, cushy breakfast for fighting-age males who arrived illegally. A lot of people, women especially, don't want more migration because of the grooming gang scandal. It's emerged that in the last 2 or 3 decades, thousands of girls underage have been abused and raped and violated by grooming gangs, often of Pakistani and Bangladeshi origin. Why import more people from the same region of the world who might commit more rapes? That's what people ask. A few cases of rape around the migrant hospitals seem to have confirmed people's very worst fears. There's a clever movement called the Pink Ladies, where girls and women demonstrate and sometimes carry out stunts while wearing pink. Do you think that, there's a guy called David Betts from King's College. You think there's going to be a civil war in the UK, and other people think...
I think there could be. You hear people and you speak to people, and people are getting more and more, not just fed up, but now irate about the migrants in this country and what it's doing. And that thing in Epping recently that went on, I'm sure some rednecks come in and they'll have a punch-up, whatever they want to do, and climbing over the police wagons and all of that. But those women and those ordinary people were rightly terrified of walking down the street because they come into these posh hotels and they're not locked up in there, they walk the streets. I mean, how can there be a deterrent where, oh, look, I get a Samsung phone, I get free dentistry? Well, I'd like not to have to wait a year to see my dentist. I had to buy my own Apple phone. I wasn't given one. I can't afford to go to the gym, but these geezers do. And I'd love to stay in a 4-star hotel and eat lovely food, please. And I'm sure half the parents I know at the local school would. No wonder people, because it's not fair.
But is there an alternative to the Reform Party? Is at, I don't know, 33% in the polls at the moment, way ahead of Labour and the Tories. If this result persists till the next election, admittedly it's a long way away, more than 4 years away, it'll create a sea change in British politics. The Tories, the world's oldest political party, will be completely eliminated. But for 20 MPs, Labour Party also. And Reform will rule the roost under the first past the post electoral system. But are they a party that will do what the British public wants? There are thinkers on the periphery of the Reform Party who doubt that and want to give us a warning and consider the alternatives. One of those is Alex Kriel, a thoughtful director of an ideas think tank that asks us to have a discussion about the topics that will affect us from a moderate perspective, and is very sceptical of the Reform Party.
I'm Alex Kriel, and I set up a group called the Thinking Coalition in about 2020 around the COVID tyranny, because I kind of realized, along with others, that a lot of things about COVID were wrong. And we set up a group to oppose government overreach and try and get some rationality back into government policies.
There seems to be a sense of being at a crossroads. Traditional parties are failing. And what we were talking about before was this, the British establishment has coddled us all in these incredible narratives that don't actually serve the British people's interests. Tell us how that started and where it's at now.
I guess it started more or less in the First World War, when they started to really use propaganda in a big way to push a narrative. And now it's completely, throughout the whole of media now, is saturated with fake stories. And I mean, you saw a big recent one is "safe and effective" was just a tagline that they kept repeating over and over again, whereas anyone who understood vaccination would know that there were some big questions there. So I think now, we're starting to look obviously at a story of very high levels of immigration into the UK, and that's been a reality for quite, probably 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. But all of a sudden, that has now exploded onto the front page. Let's say 2 years ago, it was unacceptable to talk about inward immigration, and all of a sudden, it now becomes front and center every single day. And that's suggesting to me that, yes, there's a real problem, but it's become inside the Overton window, and someone is pushing that for a reason. And I think that's today's theme, is inward immigration, excessive immigration.
Who are the people pushing this and why?
I mean, it's across the whole media complex now, but I can give you one example specifically. It's a guy called Matt Goodwin, who today is I guess he's a spokesman, Professor Matt Goodwin, for Reform, or very closely associated with Reform. And he is pushing the idea that England is at boiling point, that riots will become commonplace, and all of those things, that there's a lot of immigrants causing terrible crimes inside the UK. Now, that same person is today a visiting fellow of Chatham House, which is a very deep state think tank funded by the Gates Foundation and Soros's Open Society Foundations. And he's been closely working with that same organization, Chatham House, a few years ago, actually promoting open borders. He was smearing anyone that stood up and said, we want to limit immigration. So he was smearing UKIP, which then became Reform, and also EDL and other parties. So The same person who was pushing open borders is now telling us, essentially it's time to riot because we've reached boiling point.
So you don't think that's an organic position that he's arrived at through reflection? Rather, you think that the bad guys or the deep state's trying to control the narrative, or trying to control us into perhaps rioting and then getting imprisoned, or?
Well, I can't guarantee that, but you just take a view. Do you think this flip from open borders radicalism to totally closed borders and rioting, do you think that's organic? It's that's an opinion. My opinion is probably it's not organic, because another piece of the puzzle comes in when they announce the BRIC card, digital ID, as the solution to illegal immigration. So ultimately the deep state objective, or one of them, is to obviously get digital ID implemented in the UK. They've been trying to do it for 20 plus years. And now this anger over illegal immigration could be the trigger that gets people to accept finally digital ID in the form of this BRIC card that they've been proposing.
Wow. So out of the frying pan into the fire. So the British public is still being manipulated because this cause that they so care about has been ignored for decades.
Yeah.
It's dangled in front of them to bring in digital ID. Well, why is digital ID a bad thing?
Once you have digital ID centralized, it controls access to everything, to banking, to travel, to healthcare, to absolutely everything. And once that is essentially in the hands of the government, they can switch that on and off at will. And you then really are a prisoner in a digital prison, because if any of those things are turned off, you're in big trouble. So, you are then completely dependent on everything from somebody else, de facto the state, and actually not just the state, but it'll be a merger of the state and the big tech companies that own the infrastructure that operates all of those systems.
A lot of people are saying, well, putting their faith into the Reform Party, used to be UKIP.
Yeah.
But you're a bit sceptical, aren't you?
Well, I'm very skeptical. I'm completely skeptical because, again, COVID was a real-life experiment in tyranny.
This is a vital update about coronavirus.
To help save lives, stay at home. Anyone can spread coronavirus. You should now only go out to when absolutely necessary for food, medicine, work, or exercise. Always try to stay 2 meters apart. Do not meet others outside your household, even friends and family.
Stay home. Protect the NHS. Save lives.
Look them in the eyes and tell them you're doing all you can to stop the spread of COVID-19. Stay home, protect the NHS, save lives.
Britain had a pretty tough lockdown policy during COVID and very strong propaganda for it. But actually, lockdowns didn't make a difference, as scholars have shown, to overall excess mortality, although there was a huge impact on economic growth. Scholars from University of Lund in Sweden show that Sweden lost a year's economic growth from COVID, whereas the UK lost 3 years. But Sweden didn't have any lockdowns at all. And I remember, as I live in Sweden, that I was going to restaurants and living life completely normally while the rest of Europe was completely locked down. I never saw a single mask. And yet, Sweden not only ended up with the lowest economic cost in Europe, but the lowest excess mortality as well, as shown by these Office of National Statistics figures last year. So the British approach towards COVID was totally wrong, and Sweden was the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room showing that modest or no measures and no propaganda campaigns worked best. To be fair, he was against lockdowns, but Farage was insufficiently sceptical of the vaccine, which are equally controversial.
If ever there was a moment to call for a government of all the talents, much as I don't like Tony Blair, he does get things done. He does command respect. He is seriously bright. Why not get people like Tony Blair involved to help us solve a national crisis? We have absolutely got to up the pace of vaccinations. Otherwise, I fear for so many millions of men and women running their own businesses.
Well, I've been doing some number crunching this so that you didn't have to, on vaccines. There's an Israeli study from June 2025 that shows that if a vaccine was taken between the weeks of 8 to 13 of a pregnancy, you have a 50% higher chance of miscarriage in absolute numbers. If you have 100,000 pregnancies, 5,000 fetuses died, and those fetuses tend to die in the last 10 or 15 weeks of the pregnancy. So, I mean, fully developed fetuses with all the devastation that implies. According to the Journal of the American Medical Association, if you don't take the vaccine, there's a 2 in 100,000 chance of dying. Obviously, the 5,000 in 100,000 death toll for fetuses whose mothers have received the vaccine is much higher. To spell it out, there's a very low risk to a young mother in not taking the vaccine, but a much, much higher risk to the fetus in taking the vaccine. What's the choice? However, until 2024, the NHS was touting this, and now in 2025, when RFK in the US has rescinded it, and the British government has quietly dropped the requirement, if you see it, their latest recommendation, without explaining why, none of the mainstream media mention it. Rather, they have a sort of argumentative article in The Guardian. It's the only reference I could find to the removal of the pregnancy mandate, where they talk about pregnant people community. I mean, that tells you all you need to know about the article, doesn't it? The pregnant people community is up in arms over the removal of these requirements. People who read The Guardian, it's the most trusted newspaper among British decision makers, you can see in this survey, they're completely clueless about the world, and it was probably wrong of Farage, as Alex points out, to align himself too closely with this mainstream community, as he did at the beginning when he said this.
And reform essentially fell in line with the establishment. So Nigel Farage himself endorsed Tony Blair to run the vaccination program. Well, if you're endorsing Tony Blair, you're endorsing digital ID, because Tony Blair's big idea was to have a COVID pass. And also you had two of reform leaders endorsing compulsory vaccination for care home workers. And one of them, Richard Tice, just flat out lied 2 years down the road and said, I always supported individual choice, whereas he's literally on record saying care home workers must be vaccinated. So I don't trust them, and I've seen them fall in line with the establishment when it's needed. You know, exactly the time when you need them to stand up, they actually just toe the establishment line.
So are they kind of receptacle for protest votes, and once they've grabbed all those votes, they'll line up with the government? So kind of trap for people.
I would say so. I would say, you know, people would have understood, the power brokers would have understood there would be a mass exodus from the Conservative Party when they pushed up visa issuance to 1.4 million visas, excluding tourist visas. So that was a total betrayal of everybody in the Conservative Party. And I think they must have understood there would be an exodus, but they need to keep people voting, so they need to keep the game going. So I do think that Reform at least captured all of those disaffected Conservative voters in order to keep the show on the road, basically. They didn't want them, those dissidents, going off and supporting real dissident parties, or maybe even opting out of the system. So the system...
Or right? Causing a revolution
or anything, yeah. So they needed a receptacle to put them in. I think it is a containment vessel, yeah. And if you look at the media coverage they get, if you go to Google, type in Nigel Farage, you will see every single UK newspaper will have multiple articles about him over the last 2 weeks. It's wall-to-wall coverage right now, which is another big red flag. They could maybe trigger a no confidence vote and call an early election. So, again, what they're doing now, pushing this whole anger over immigration, they're actually obviously setting Farage up to come into power because his shtick has always been anti-immigration. So the media's creating the wave that he could ride. So it could be that, they may not wait till the next election cycle and they might try and do something early, but it's hard to say.
But do you think, doesn't he increasingly talk about illegal migration, and they'll pounce on that? But actually those boats only are a fraction of the immigration problem, right? Most of them are arrive entirely legally. And stop that immigration with the stroke of a pen.
100%. That's why the Conservatives betrayed everybody, because they issued 1.4 million visas if you're excluding tourist visas. I think with tourist visas about 2.5 million visas in a year. So that's a voluntary decision, and a priori that a large number of those people will overstay and become unauthorized migrants. That's actually a huge problem. It may be they're sort of less bad people, if you know what I mean, because they're coming in through a process rather than on a small boat, but it's in number terms it's a much bigger problem. And I think the estimated number of unauthorized migrants now, from even a few years ago this was done, is about 1.2 million people from the Pew Research Center. So who knows where we are now.
What Alex is saying is, with his experience of the deep state or the permanent bureaucracy or the establishment, whatever you want to call it, this amorphous organization, incredibly capable of brainwashing the British people and to controlling them and to pushing them in one direction and getting them into the mass persuasion game. They're not lying idle, they're still there. They were able to get millions of people to take a vaccine that to lock down, and in a way that was detrimental to the British economy. Who is to say that they haven't prepared something else? And I think that's a serious point. People talk about the genuine popular insurrection that's going on. The British people are finally rising up. Are they rising up because the establishment has found a way to channel that into either a harmless outlet, which can be defanged, namely reform, or towards a purpose that can even further extend the deep state's or the state's powers over the British people through digital ID and so on? So what he's saying is that we're still in the aftermath of COVID, this incredible event. We mustn't forget it. We must learn the lessons from that. And we must be very wary of walking into another trap with Farage. Well, be that as it may, but what are the alternatives? Well, one is kind of insurrection or revolution, but there are no leaders and the state will always win. And there are real problems with that, which Alex tells us. Then there are political democratic alternatives. One is the Advance Party, led by Tommy Robinson and supported by Elon Musk. It's more hardcore alternative. But there are also smaller parties that are more genuinely conservative and perhaps less rabble-rousing, to put it in some delicate words. And what do they offer?
There's a guy, David Benson, he made a splash. He's a Canadian academic at King's College, so he's not some kind of conspiracy theorist from which, and they're very close to the defence industry anyway. But what he thinks there's going to be a civil war, or could be. Do you think there's a chance of that? Do you think it's over-exaggerated?
I don't think that. I hope there isn't, because if any kind of violence, the state will always win. So if anyone's thinking about it, I would absolutely not do that. I think it's a terrible idea. I hope it won't come to that. And somebody pointed out recently, look, during COVID, when we were locked up, forced into vaccination, harassed, applied psychology. Nobody did anything violent. So the British have a lot of patience, and I think provocateurs are trying to stir up this violence, but I just don't think it won't happen in a big way.
I think we're too old. I mean, in the old days, the population was much younger, so you had a young army of kind of unemployed men. Or
Yeah.
After the harvest was in, and they could take up the pitchforks. And now we're already so monitored, and the average age of the average Brit is like 45. 25 back in the 1900s, and the Brits never revolted even then.
So. Yeah. Well, I mean, there probably will be isolated riots of some description, but a kind of big movement to do that, I can't see it. And it's something I'm very much against, and I'm working with more serious people to try and go through the system. I think you have to use the system against the system, and trying to go through some kind of physical route is going to fail.
So there are. Reform isn't the only party, the dissenting party. Tell us a little bit about the dissident movement in Britain and the various parties that are out there and the various actors that are trying through a legal way.
I mean, first of all, there's a lot of them, and they're doing a lot, but you'll never hear about it in the mainstream media. So I can give you one example. Heritage Party, I talk to quite a lot. They have a manifesto. They field candidates. They're a registered political party. They've been opposing all this stuff for years. So, they will hopefully win. Well, they already have some council seats. Hopefully, they'll win some MP seats, and they will do single issue lobbying as well. So, those guys are working. You have something called Christian Concern, which is a fantastic organization that's using legal means like judicial review in order to challenge councils who are pushing trans ideology, and they're also using judicial review to fight against the NHS, who are allowing men essentially, or trans men, or whichever way around you want to call it, into women-only spaces. So that's another group that's using legal means to push against that ideology. And then you also have in Parliament, you never hear about, a party called DUP, an Irish party, Northern Irish party, who consistently votes Conservative on everything. They have been absolutely fantastic for years and years.
Ian Paisley's old party.
It's Ian Paisley's old party, but if you look at any debate in Parliament, the only true Conservative contribution will come from them, and it will always be high quality, and they will always vote against legislation that Conservatives would consider crazy. That they are a voice in Parliament, and they're doing a lot, and they want to do more, but you never hear about them.
The person so if you think of two roles, right? Foreign Secretary in Great Britain and the private secretary in the PM's office responsible for foreign affairs, an official whose name has never been in the newspapers. That person was like 10 times more powerful and important than the Secretary of State was. And I think this is something which people just don't really realise. And it's part of like how the whole system has become fake. So you have fake meritocracy, fake responsibility, and then fake cabinet government.
Dominic Cummings is Boris Johnson's former advisor, and is very critical of the way democratic politics is being set aside in the UK by powerful unelected officials whose name no one knows. People in the cabinet office, people in intelligence and security community. Is this so-called deep state trying to continue to control the agenda by managing and manipulating the next governing party to further their control over Britain and implement some of their new favoured initiatives using new excuses like digital ID because of mass immigration? However, I don't doubt that Reform's representatives deny any kind of influence from these forces in the shadows in Whitehall and Vauxhall. Rather, they'd attribute any shifts in Reform's behaviour to that old thing, democracy. They need new voters. That opens them up to a new line of attack by their opponents. Well, there's two ways of slicing and dicing this. I mean, one way is to say that Reform have sold out, or that they've been blunted, or that they've compromised themselves, or they're betraying their core. Another way of putting it is to say that in a democracy, you have to compromise to win the majority of voters, and that's where Reform are at the moment. As an insurgent party, Reform still haven't worked out a lot of their policy positions, but what we can see from what they have written, it's unlikely to make everyone happy. It's a compromise. So while there's a deportation of 600,000 illegals, that doesn't include all illegals, let alone legal migrants, which some people want deported, especially on the right. There's abolition of net zero, tackling woke. There's nothing about vaccines, nothing about draining the UK swamp. Trump at least has made some moves in this direction. Perhaps these issues have less popular traction in the UK. That's the innocent explanation.
What you have is, in politics, there's two things. You have purists and you have pragmatists. Yes, Reform is more pragmatic than some of the purists would like. Yes, it is, because like it or loathe it, compromise, politics is the art of the possible. We would like to do all sorts of things, and some of those things won't be able to be done. But for those critics on our, dare I say, our right, what I call the terminally online right, they're sort of right-wing Corbynistas, they would prefer to be perfect in their policy platform and achieve nothing than to be imperfect and achieve 60% of it. Yeah, right. Well, personally, let's get the 60%. Compared to what we've been governed, the Uni Party, compared to how we've been governed by Labour and Tory for the last 30 years, frankly, I'll take 60% because it's going in the right direction. And the criticisms we do get from people to our, should we say, online right, to win a general election, at last in 2004, Reform managed to get 4.1 million votes. We were worthy of that. Our heart and our gut were worthy of those votes. But to get the 11, 12 million, we need to do better. We need to have a proper policy platform. We need to engage our brain as well as our heart. And if you're sitting on a sofa, and Reform is sitting on the sofa, if there's 300,000 quid or people down there on our right to go perfection, but we need 12 million, we cannot win by being perfect. We cannot achieve the 60% by tacking to our right. Yeah, right. Because the votes aren't there, and we are a democracy. And so we have to accept, much as we'd like to have this perfection, a platform of brilliance, you still need 12 million votes, and they aren't going to come if you are purist.
I think Gawain is sincere and it makes sense, though I don't know if it allay the fears of people like Alex, who worry that the deep state is always finagling and intervening and meddling and plotting, and think that they found a tame party that can do their bidding. Meanwhile, parties on the extreme right will continue to flourish, and conservative, more moderate parties like Alex's suggestions remain below the radar. Britain First is a very right-wing party, and here they are talking about deportations, even of legal migrants.
My message to the hordes of immigrants invading this land: don't unpack, you're going